Hello everybody and welcome once again to another edition of In Pit Lane, Channel 31 Melbourne, Channel 44 Adelaide and of course on the In Pit Lane YouTube channel. Well, our guest tonight is the man behind TA2 racing in Australia, Craig Denyer. Craig has been involved in motorsport for a long time, and the TA2 series has really taken off over the last couple of years. In fact, to such an extent, there's actually two series now, and we'll be talking to Craig about that a little bit later on in the program. Now, of course, you will hear during the program or during the interview that I said to Craig, with the way things are going, anything we say regarding, calendars, dates, race meetings, etc., could be, totally blown out of the window within 24 hours. Well, sure enough, not long after we did the interview, all hell broke loose here in Victoria. So to everybody else here in Melbourne, I mean, we're all in the same boat if we live in the metro area. We're all in this together. Just hunker down, do the right thing. I mean, and for those of you who are interstate, in Adelaide, who are casting aspersions at what's happening here in Melbourne, just let this be a lesson to you. It only takes one or two people to do the wrong thing, and this whole monster can rise up again. So just stay at home, be patient, be safe. That's the main thing. And you've got plenty of entertainment going around, including some motorsport. In fact, I tell you what, when Formula One was back on the weekend, IndyCar, lots of things happening. Let's find out all about it in the In Pit Lane Motorsport News. Grid sprint race with an 8th place to Piastri, enough to leave him in the lead of the series. In Formula 2, another New Zealander, Marcus Armstrong, had a good weekend, taking 2nd place to Callum Ilott in their main race. The Porsche Super Cup brought even more good news to Kiwi fans, with Jackson Evans winning the opening round of that series. Starting from pole, Evans dominated the race, leading all the way to hold off teammate Dylan Pereira. Australian driver Jordan Love started back in 18th position, but drove through the pack to finish 12th in his Super Cup debut. All three classes will again race back at the Red Bull Ring this weekend, supporting the Formula One Styrian Grand Prix. More Antipodean domination, this time in IndyCar. Australia's Will Power led the field away from pole and set up a strong lead early in the race. But a badly timed pit stop effectively ended his chance of victory, and a stall while leaving the pits later in the race was the final straw. This left the race to New Zealand driver Scott Dixon. Fresh from his win in the opening round at Texas, Dixon took control of the race on lap 49, holding on to win from Graham Rahal and Simon Pagenaud. The race was the first major real hot weather test of IndyCar's new aero screen, and things certainly got hot. Oliver Askew hit the wall, but said later he was severely impacted by the heat, and Connor Daly, who finished back in 12th place, lost almost 5.5 kilos in the race. Race winner Dixon himself lost cooling to his helmet early in the race, but said he didn't feel that the conditions were all that bad, all things considered. Kevin Harvick took out his 2nd consecutive victory at the Brickyard, taking out last Sunday's NASCAR round after race leader Denny Hamlin hit the wall late in the race. Harvick won the restart to lead home Matt Kenseth and Eric Almirola after an incident-packed race. The biggest crash of the day didn't happen on the track but in pit lane, forcing 6 drivers out of the race and sending Ryan Blaney pit crew member Zach Price to the hospital after his leg got caught between cars in a pile-up that would have looked quite at home on the Monash Freeway during peak hour. As expected, tyres were a real issue as Ryan Newman hit the wall after a flat tyre, as did Eric Jones. Stage 1 winner William Byron also blew a left front tyre early in the 2nd stage, ending his chance of victory. Ryan Blaney was the next to bring out a caution with a crash on lap 88, and Alex Bowman also suffered a tyre failure on the high-speed Indy Oval, putting him out as well. And the 2020 Formula One season is finally underway after its false start back in March at Albert Park. And if anybody was hoping that the long break may see a change in the status quo, then they were sadly disappointed. Mercedes once again dominated the weekend, although it was Valtteri Bottas that set the pace and came away with the lion's share of points. Bottas led his teammate Lewis Hamilton across the line, but a 5-second penalty to Hamilton after he made contact with Alex Albon promoted Ferrari's Charles Leclerc into an unlikely 2nd place. The Italian team has struggled for pace all weekend, so Leclerc's unexpected points will be most welcome. The other delighted beneficiary of Hamilton's misfortune was McLaren driver Lando Norris. Norris had driven well all weekend, and he showed that the team may well be the real big improver of the 2020 season. It was a disappointing return for Daniel Ricciardo, who had just scraped into the top 10 in qualifying and retired from the race after engine problems apparently caused by overheating in the hot conditions. It was a race of high attrition, with 9 drivers, including Max Verstappen, failing to finish the race. Teams will have little time for post-race post-mortems, with the second race of the season, the inaugural Styrian Grand Prix at the same circuit, this weekend. And Melbourne-based supercar teams made the last-minute dash for the New South Wales border earlier this week to beat the return of metro-wide lockdowns and the closure of the New South Wales border. Melbourne-based teams Walkinshaw Andretti United, Tickford, Erebus, Team 18 and Kelly Brothers Racing scrambled to pack up cars and equipment in time to beat the lockdown. Off the back of round 3 of the championship less than 2 weeks ago, teams had little time to prepare and have cars ready to roll with only a few hours' notice.
It's been a big rush. All the guys here, as you can see, are frantically putting corners in the car, uprights, to try and get the cars so we can roll them to put them in the truck. Obviously our engines were out after last weekend, the gearboxes, all sorts of stuff, so we're working very hard at the moment. We've got the coach out the back there that's getting loaded with all sorts of stuff at the moment. We will probably be away for about a month, so a big project for all the Victorian teams, and we're very lucky because we get to go to Mildura, so obviously the Kellys are based up there and that's on the other side of the border just, so we might sneak over there tonight and we'll reconvene tomorrow and see what the plan is from there.
In a little over 4 hours, the crews had the cars mostly fitted out and ready to roll, and with essential team members, including drivers, packed for a minimum of 28 days away from their families, the race transporter and the team coach left Kelly Racing's Braeside headquarters just after 5 p.m, with the aim to be on the New South Wales side of the border by midnight. And that's the In-Pit Lane news for the week ending Friday, July the 10th, 2020. Remember that if you'd like to contact In-Pit Lane, our email is theshow@inpitlane.com. We have a website with links to live motorsport events and classic race footage. Make sure you like and subscribe the In-Pit Lane YouTube channel and make sure you click on notifications. It's very important. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and be amazed on those rare occasions when we remember to bother with something called Instagram. No, we are not on TikTok. If you have to ask why, we can no longer be friends. We're going to take a break now on In-Pit Lane, but when we come back, we'll be joined by Craig Denyer from TA2 Muscle Car Series here in Australia. And TA2, fabulous cars. If you don't know what TA2s are, they're sort of space frame chassis, big American muscle cars. In fact, let's go to the break now with a bit of TA2 action. And when we return, we'll be joined by our special guest, Craig Denyer. You're watching In-Pit Lane. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Well, over the last few weeks on In-Pit Lane, we've spoken on a number of occasions about TA2. We had Aaron Seaton on the program a couple of weeks ago, and he was very fulsome in his praise for the category. Well, the man behind bringing TA2 to Australia and running the original series for TA2 is our guest tonight. Craig Denyer has been involved in motorsport for well as long as I can remember now, and let's face it, that's a long time, as you well know if you've been watching this program for 24 years. But there are in fact now 2 TA2 series, and we'll find out a bit about that in a moment. But let's find out what TA2 is and exactly why it's become so popular, not just here in Australia and of course in its homeland of the United States, but all around the world. And I'm pleased to say that Craig Denyer is on the line right now. And Craig, welcome to In-Pit Lane. And first of all, for people who perhaps don't know what TA2 is, explain what it is and where it came from.
Yeah, thank you, Brett, and thanks for the opportunity, and congratulations too on so many years of In-Pit Lane. Let's hope it keeps going forever and ever and ever. But TA2, muscle car racing, the guy that really deserves the credit for bringing it to Australia is a gentleman called Peter Robinson, who lives on the Gold Coast and has a factory based in Brisbane. And Peter saw the opportunity some years ago of coming up with a low-cost, big bang for buck I guess, car racing series that he didn't think was around in Australia. And he did a deal with Chaz Howe, who's a well-known chassis builder, speedway, sprint car and touring car builder in the US, and built the very, very first prototype TA2 car. TA2 migrated into the American Trans Am series. Of course, Trans Am racing, very big in America in the 1960s, and Trans Am racing in Australia was also quite popular back in the days when Gagan, Jane and Beachy raced in the late 60s, early 70s. So the name is familiar to us, and Trans Am's going through a bit of a rebirth in America at the moment. But the TA2 formula really came out of Sweden. It started in Sweden. Chaz Howe built cars originally for Camaro Cup series in Sweden, and that's really where the technical specifications of TA2 came from. Very simple, Brett. They're a space frame chassis, a proper racing chassis. They have a McLaren Engineering 525 horsepower engine in. They have big 15-inch Hoosier tyres, big bag tyres, so they move around a lot. Absolutely no aero. They've got a 4-speed gearbox, a speedway type rear end. They are current bodied Mustang, Camaro and Dodges. They sound great. They look great. The fans love them. The most important part is they're cheap to run.
And that seems to be the attraction at the moment. That's certainly one thing that Aaron was saying, that I think he said that the team he was running for had gone almost 2 years without a major engine rebuild. So I suppose that's the price is a major attraction. For somebody looking to get into Trans Am or TA2 racing here in Australia, I mean, what sort of cost are we looking at to both to buy the car but also to run it for a full season?
Look, you would buy a brand new turnkey race car, depending on currency conversion, but let's say 150 grand Australian dollars. So that's all inclusive, and you get with that 2 sets of Hoosier tyres to go racing straight away with. It's a great piece of machinery for that kind of money. In terms of running costs, you'll get up to 3 seasons before you have to change an engine, and the engines come in at less than 20 grand. For a 525 horsepower McLaren Engineering, essentially dry sump race engine. Your maintenance on your gearbox, once a year, probably you need to freshen it, but you'd probably get 2 seasons out of it. They're not hard on brakes. There's not a great deal of grip in the Hoosier tyres, which is fantastic because they move around a lot and they don't put a lot of load on all the consumables. So the bang for buck in terms of cost to race is very, very reasonable. You'd probably do a season, I would think, at the TA2 muscle car level. You should be able to do a season for certainly less than $10,000 a round, considerably less than $10,000 a round, including travel and accommodation.
You mentioned the control engine, the McLaren controlled engine. What is the basis of that engine, and give us a few specs on that?
Look, it's basically a Chev LS3 based engine, but they were built originally for this Camaro Cup series that ran in Sweden, and there's been a number of engine builders that have built that engine to those specifications, but we rev them to 6,500 RPM. They have a control ECU, so no teams can go in and fiddle with the parameters of the engine, the timing, fuel, all that kind of stuff. They can get access to certain data, but they can't actually go in and change any of the parameters of the ECU. The engines are tightly sealed. They have to come back to PRB, which is Peter Robinson's business in Brisbane, to be rebuilt. So it's a very, very tightly controlled series. All the engines are built within 10 horsepower of one another, and you can guarantee that that there's absolutely transparency in that whole process, the way we manage that process.
And that seemed to be one of the things that Aaron was particularly enamoured of, was the fact that the cars, as he said, are just plain fun to drive. I mean, even though we hear sort of 525 horsepower, you think supercars with over 600, sports sedans and the major Trans Am cars, well over 650 up into the 700 mark. But 525, I mean, by modern standards, it probably doesn't sound that much. But when you look at the golden days of Formula 5000 and those sorts of things, that's still an awful lot of power, isn't it?
Well, it is, and you still only got a 1,200 kilo car, so they're still 150 kilos lighter than a V8 supercar. And I think the telling aspect of how competitive the cars are goes back to this year's Adelaide 500, where Aaron Seaton raced in the Trans Am or TA2's support event in Adelaide, and he was less than 4 seconds a lap off Jamie Wincup's fastest time. Now, when you consider we're running on 15-inch big bag Hoosier tyres, we don't have the biggest brakes in the world, we have absolutely no aero, it shows just how competitive and how quick these cars are and value for money. And I think, again, to highlight the difference, I think someone once said to me that an upright for a V8 supercars these days is in the vicinity of $40,000. The upright for a TA2 muscle car is $200. There's the difference.
Well, that is indeed a major difference, and we'll find out a bit more about. We mentioned the series and what's happening, of course, in light of the current situation, what the plans are for the rest of this year. Obviously, a very fluid situation. But Craig, we're going to take a break now. If you can stay with us, we're going to, as I said, to head off for a break. When we come back, we'll find out more about TA2 racing with our guest Craig Denyer. You're watching In Pit Lane, Channel 31 Melbourne, Channel 44 Adelaide, and of course on the In Pit Lane YouTube channel. We'll be back right after this break. Welcome back to In Pit Lane. Well, our guest this week is Craig Denyer from TA2 Muscle Car Series. And Craig, we were talking about before the break about the cost of running the cars, and let's talk about the series. Where do you run the series? I mean, in light of all the chaos at the moment, I mean, what's the current situation as we speak, as we record this? By the time this goes to air next week, I imagine things are going to change again, probably. But I mean, as we speak now, what's the current situation with your series?
Basically, we were planning on a 5-round series, originally a 6-round series for this year, but that's been scaled back to 5 rounds, and we've primarily run with the AMRS series. So our next round was due at Winton in mid-July. There's some concern now about that, given the current situation regarding Victoria and the Queensland border lockdown. But the plan was to do primarily AMRS at Winton, followed by Sydney Motorsport Park, followed by Queensland Raceway. Then we go to Bathurst for the Bathurst International, which is the ARG event, and combine the Trans Am series that they have in the TA2 cars in one massive 40-car grid, which should be absolutely spectacular. And then we'll wrap up our final round at Tailem Bend in the early week in December. That's the plan at this stage. There may well be some changes depending on what happens week to week.
Well, something that was announced just recently, the AMRS announced that they're going to actually have a round at Sandown coming up. I mean, would that be something that would interest you? I mean, Sandown, the traditional home of V8 racing, certainly in Victoria. I mean, we'd love to see those things unleashed at up the back straight at Sandown. Have you had any discussions about joining that particular meeting?
Absolutely. In fact, I was only talking to Matt Baragwanath this morning about Sandown. We're very, very keen to be in there. I think Winton may well be in doubt for us because of the current regulations, just getting back into Queensland. But Sandown certainly would be now on the agenda. And we put our hand up this morning to say, look, let's be considered for that round as well. So, I think, look, there's been 2 distinct series this year, and the dedicated motorsport fan will be aware there is a Trans Am series, which ARG run, and there's the TA2 Muscle Car series, which we run. Both series run exactly the same spec cars, and all those cars are supplied by Peter Robertson, PRB Distributions in Brisbane. We've sold over 50 cars in Australia. We were planning to split the series next year anyhow and have a professional series and then more of a master style series. But we brought that forward a year when ARG had a desire to run their own series on higher profile race meetings, but still the majority of our existing competitor base didn't want the big event meetings. So the series split. We're hoping that we can maintain sensibility when it comes to rules and regulations, and the competitor can pick and choose where he wants to race, but we can all come together and race competitively at events like the Bathurst 100 at Mount Panorama, or maybe some other events across the season as well.
And I think that's one of the things that they found with the Australian GT Championship and GT3 racing in general. There's this real sort of dichotomy between those people who want to run the really high-profile events like Clipsal and those sorts of things. Running with the supercars and running at those events is all well and good, but that comes at a cost, doesn't it?
It does, and you've got to change in the competitor base too. I mean, you've got guys like Aaron Seaton, George Mediki, Nathan Hearn that are very, very fast. And in many cases, particularly in Aaron and Nathan's cases, probably going to end up professional racing drivers. And they're in a different league to the majority of the other TA2 existing competitor base. So by splitting the series, it does satisfy both ends of the competitor base. And as I said, we can still come together at major events that suit both series. And I think that's very, very powerful. And I think everybody can win out of that. And prior to COVID-19, we'd sold, as I said, 50 cars. There was enough cars in the country to support 2 series, and hopefully that will continue on once we get through this mess. We've also just launched TA2 into New Zealand as well, which will give us the chance to run a number of Trans-Tasman events with TA2 New Zealand and Australia, which will be fantastic.
Well, as I was talking with young Tommy Smith last week on the program, he's done a lot of racing in Asia, and we've seen the Thailand series. TA2 is becoming increasingly big in Asia as well.
It's in 12 countries worldwide now, Brett. So as I said, it's in Sweden, it's in Asia, you correctly mentioned. In Europe, it's in the US, it's in New Zealand, it's in Australia. And again, it comes back to that very, very simple fact. They are a great race car, a properly built race car. They're at the right price. They're, by motorsport standards, they're very, very cheap to run, and they're a great bang for buck. The fan love them. They're good-looking Mustangs, Camaros, and Dodges. They sound like real race cars, and the driver loves the experience because they feel like real race cars to drive. So there's a lot of positives all the way down the road.
You mentioned a little bit earlier the 3 body styles, the Camaro, the Mustang, and the Dodge Challenger at the moment. Has there been any talk about possibly expanding that? I mean, in terms of trying to bring a bit more variety and perhaps even allow some European style bodies. I mean, I remember Trans Am, the main series, some artist impressions years ago of some BMWs and Audis. And all. They looked amazing. So has there been any talk about that?
Look, I think it may well be in Thailand. There was a Mercedes-Benz bodied TA2 car. I guess, we're only 3 years into this series and only really our 2nd year as a national championship. So, and our DNA is TA2 muscle cars. That's where we came from, and that's where we saw the appeal being. And American muscle cars, Australians love American muscle cars. They love American V8 engines. And so I guess if we saw a shift that allowed us to do that without losing the DNA of what we actually had built up, then we would consider that. But at the moment, the focus is on, current bodied Dodges, current bodied Camaros, current bodied Mustangs, and let's all go racing.
Well, hopefully we'll see you racing down here at Sandown, and of course for our viewers on Channel 44, at the end of the year you will see the cars in action at Tailem Bend. Good luck with the series. I think it makes a lot of sense in so many ways at the moment, and with a lot of the uncertainty surrounding supercars. I mean, for those of us, for us dinosaurs who still want our big V8s and our rear-wheel drive cars and all the rest of it, TA2 is looking increasingly like a sensible future in future option. But now, Craig Denyer, thanks for joining us once again on In Pit Lane, and good luck with TA2 muscle cars for the future.
Thanks, Brett, and thanks for the opportunity.
And thanks to Craig Denyer for that interview. It was great to learn about TA2. As we said during the interview, everything regarding the meeting at Sandown and whatever's happening in Melbourne has certainly been thrown into the hat at the moment. We're not really sure exactly what's going to happen, except we know that for at least 6 weeks we're going to be locked down again and nothing's going to be happening. So look, the fact that there's any motorsport happening anywhere in the world is either a good or bad thing, depending on which way you look at it. But it does give us, at least gives us something to talk about and a bit of a much-needed distraction from the horrors of the real world. Look, if you're looking for more of a distraction, be with us again next week. Not sure who we'll have on next week. Just in case you didn't realise it, trust me, I'm making this up as I go along. We're missing our studio. I'm missing my In Pit Lane family and everybody at RMI TV. But as we said at the start of the show, we're all in this together. So until we see you again next week, stay safe. And from all of us here at In Pit Lane, thanks for joining us. Bye for now.